So my name is Ian L. Patterson. I am the CEO here at Plurilock, and I'm very excited to be having this conversation. So today we're going to be talking about financial services, cybersecurity, work from home 2021. We're going to stay away from politics, and joined by a really interesting group of individuals. And so I'm very excited to talk about these topics from multiple perspectives. So what we're going to do today, just in terms of agenda, we're going to start off, we're going to do some introductions from the panelists. And then from there, we're going to get into some questions. We do have a Q&A function. So if there are questions from the audience that come up during the conversation, please feel free to drop them in. If they make sense, we can intersperse the conversation with those questions during the event. And then if we don't get to them, then we will try and leave some time at the end for additional Q&A. This webinar is being recorded, and so will be available as a replay after the fact. And you'll receive a link to that as a follow-up to the event itself. So with that, I will kick it off. So just really quick intro on Plurilock for those who are not familiar. Plurilock, we're an AI cybersecurity company, and we focus on authenticating people by their behavior. So literally the way that you type on a keyboard and move a mouse, we can actually identify you as a person. We have an endpoint agent that provides continuous authentication, which means that particularly for work from home, being able to know with a high degree of certainty, is it actually Ian who's on that device 5 minutes after he logs in, 20 minutes after he logs in, or 3 hours after you log in? That's something that we can answer with a high degree of certainty. So customers for us, FedGov, as well as financial institutions. So my perspective and my context is as a vendor serving financial institutions as customers, and can certainly relate to some conversations there. Our product itself does play into DFIR, SIM augmentation, as well as identity and access management. And so that's really the context that I'm going to be bringing to the table. And so with that, I'm very excited to introduce you to the panelists. So we'll go around the room and we'll let folks introduce themselves. And so Michael, you are the first up in the line. And so over to you.
Thanks very much. And thanks for allowing me to sit on this panel. My name is Michael McGovern. I've been in the financial services industry for over 18 years. Started with a bank in Cambridge by the name of Cambridge Trust Company, and currently at Metro Credit Union, where I serve as the Chief Technology Officer, Chief Information Security Officer, and Chief Data Privacy Officer. So a lot of roles there, but they really do all kind of integrate with one another. So again, thank you very much for allowing me to be on this panel.
Great, John Wang, and I'm with Deloitte. I was telling Ian, I think I'm going to be the diversity play on this panel a little bit. I'm one of these kids doesn't belong. I'm not a cybersecurity or security expert. My focus is on digital banking front to back. So helping advise leading banks and credit unions on how to basically move into the digital world. And I just realized I'm in my 25th year at the firm. And part of that opportunity is getting the benefit of seeing not just what happens in our local market, but also abroad. So I think we can learn a lot from what we see outside of our local geography. Carlos?
Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be here. Thanks for the opportunity. So I'm an incident response lead at the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco with 15 years of information security experience. I love what I do, and I'm passionate about sharing the knowledge. So I'm happy to be here today with everyone.
Awesome. Well, as I said, I'm really excited because I think we have three very, very diverse perspectives. I think we have the industry perspective, the executive perspective, the frontline perspective, the vendor perspective. So I'm really excited. So let's just get into it. I think my first question is kind of going to be directed towards John, because I think it'll sort of help set the stage. One of the questions that I'm really interested in is what are the second order or third order effects that the pandemic, that the stimulus is causing to financial institutions in general, even before we get to IT and cybersecurity? The context, why I'm asking the question, is that we've heard from a number of our mid-sized financial institutional customers that, look, things are different for a number of reasons, but one of the big things is that interest rates are basically zero, and banks aren't making the money on the interest rates as they were before. And so, like, how do you think about, how does that affect those institutions in general, and kind of what are you seeing amongst your clientele?
So Michael, keep me honest here, but I think it's different based on industry. But here's what I see. We've been in a low interest rate environment for a very long time. So, looking for non-NIM type revenue sources, fee-based services have been something that's been happening for a while. I'd say even a year before the 2020, before the crisis, a lot of the banks had a not so great quarter. And based on that, there has been a refocus on cost cutting, on compliance, all the things that you have to do to protect and maintain your bank. I do see that there has, over this time, particularly in the most recent, the change in the market, there's been more focus away from discretionary spend, more on mandatory things, or things that just make common sense, right? So big programs. I know, Michael, you just talk about doing a big transformation. That's not few and far between, but very deliberate. I think people are very deliberate about choosing when you want to undergo those kind of changes. What we find more is that big programs are being broken down to smaller ones, innovation still happening, but in a very more deliberate way than we would have seen maybe 2-3 years ago as a starting point. Yeah.
Yeah. We didn't foresee COVID. So we started this operation transformation project 3 years ago. And actually we finalized it during the COVID or the pandemic itself, where we went live with a new core in October. I agree with you, right? So one of the things that is always difficult to do, we run our information technology and information security teams pretty lean and mean at Metro. But again, trying to get those budget dollars in order to purchase additional tool sets for the credit union. And even when I worked at the bank, was really difficult, or is very difficult. Sometimes you leverage your vendors. We have a third party that comes in on an annual basis that actually does a security assessment and does a walkthrough and tries to walk in to get into one of our banks. They do site visits and those kind of things. A lot of those things actually assist us in order to go to the senior management team as well as to the board to get those dollars that we need in order to provide either a hardware solution or a software solution that can protect you from that next vulnerability or that next way of the bad guys trying to get into your financial institution.
Maybe building on that thread, I think organizations that started initiatives well in advance are really reaping the benefits, particularly the ones that have really invested in digital type channels, digital capabilities. I keep saying front to back. It's not a shiny front end, new website or new mobile app. It's straight through to how you maintain and control your data as well. So those organizations have continued to do quite well, and those initiatives we see continue to grow, particularly with all the financial measures, right? So I know we were talking a little bit earlier about PPP in the US, and I'm based in Canada, so CEBA is the equivalent up here. Getting those products out to market has been something that has been a bit of a challenge for organizations that did not have the initial foundational capabilities to have that business agility, not big, it's not software development agile, but business agility that mattered.
John, did you see some of the financial institutions just not wanting even to provide PPP?
I think everyone wanted to play. Some actually missed the boat because they couldn't get their act together. And I think that's, it's horrible because you look at the small businesses across our countries, and they're the backbone of our financial economy, and they're struggling, right? So we should be doing everything we can to help them, and I think banks have been trying that. I do know in the US of a few that missed the opportunity because there's limited funding, right? In Canada, it's been a little bit different. I think that everyone who wanted to participate has been able to, but different stages of efficiency and different stages in terms of, you think about data and risk, how well things are managed. Some have done better than others, for sure.
So Michael, you talked about switching to core. Maybe could you just expand a little bit on that? Like what was the digital transformation that you've gone through, and how did that, how was that impacted by COVID? I mean, was that accelerated? Was that slowed down? Was that harder? Was it easier?
God, there's a lot of questions there. At a really high level, we realized several years ago, 3 years ago now, that The technologies that we had in place took the credit union to where we are today, but we realized in order to move forward the next 5, 10, 15 years, we needed to bring new technologies in-house in order to do that. And not only, like I said before, we replaced many other components in our environment. We've outsourced a lot of those components because at the end of the day, we need to compete with the traditional financial services industry as well as the non-traditional ones and the new fintechs that are popping up, and the Walmarts and the Apples, and we just realized that we needed to make a change, and we did that not only to compete, but really to build in a lot of efficiencies that we didn't have prior, because we took all these systems and kind of bolted them onto one another to provide products and services to the members, but also to allow the business lines to be able to do their day-to-day work. And like I said, it did what it needed to do, but it was time for a change, and we did the change during the actual pandemic, 100% remotely. Kudos to the entire Metro organization, from the IT team to the project management office to all the business lines, in order to make that happen. The other thing, as well as part of the whole COVID pandemic, we had to go from a 100% in-house shop to everybody working from home. And we were able to do that in a 3-week period. Another feat that, kudos to the people that were able to pull that off. We actually implemented a disaster recovery plan that we had, where we got laptops. Laptops got sent to Metro. We ended up pushing the Metro image down to them, and then we prioritized what departments would be getting those first. But it did accelerate one thing as part of this whole core conversion, was we were going from a traditional workstation environment to a virtual desktop environment. So we had to accelerate that because, again, not knowing that we were going to be out of the office for almost a year now, the disaster recovery contract was very expensive. So we needed to pull those systems back in, send them back to the third party that we got them from, and then build out new virtual desktops and get that into the hands of our user community. So at the end of this, we had a better remote access solution, because we also built in multi-factor authentication into this than we had prior the pandemic.
I think that in and of itself is an amazing feat. I mean, being able to pivot like that within a 3-week period, I think is tremendous. How do you guys think about the current technology state and then moving into 2021? So I think, similar to yourself, Michael, we've certainly seen that the majority of the financial institutional customer base that we have, they've got countermeasures now. They've got the plan in place, so they're productive to a point with either running a skeleton staff, like in the actual branches themselves. A lot more work from home. How does that translate into the next 12 months, where we've got some vaccines that are rolling out, some idea that there might be more return to the office? Question mark around, will it be the same office? I've certainly seen some information to indicate that, yeah, there might be a return to the office, particularly when we're talking about back office folks, but the square footage per employee is going to have to go up, because you're going to need to maintain more social distancing. So I'm curious how the way that you have the infrastructure set up today, is that going to need to change again? Are you now just locked in? Is it all virtual desktops? And would love to kind of go around the virtual room and kind of talk about how each of you see what the next year is going to bring.
Yeah, I'll start off, and then you can go to John or Carlos after that. But yeah, I don't know what the new norm is going to be, but I know the new norm is not going to be 100% of people in the office. Our CEO is was against remote workforce, but again, he has seen that it actually works, and we were able to do a core conversion remotely. So I really do think that maybe it becomes 50% of people in the office and 50% of the people working from home. Maybe they alternate, where you work from home this week, but you got to go in the office next week, or you only need to go into the office when there's a particular project going on, so you could have project meetings. who knows what it's going to look like. But again, at Metro, it's going to be much different with more people working from their home offices.
At Deloitte, we've been thinking a lot about the future of work for a while, actually, well before the pandemic started. So how do you define the workplace and the workforce, like the people and who does what? If you remember all these orthodoxies we used to have, you can't have traders that are not on the trading floor. They've got to be, and then the pandemic hit. All of a sudden it's like, oh, we could have people trading from home. So all of a sudden things changed, right? But I'm with you, Mike, in the sense certain roles people do, still should be on-prem. Some can be remote. I've worked with a few CEOs of the banks I service, and a lot of them are in the office. I'm like, what are you doing in the office? He's like, listen, if I'm going to make my branch staff go into the branches, I'm going to be in the office. So for that, it's a leadership reason for doing it. It's got nothing more than that. He's wearing gloves and masks and the whole bit. The CEO of my company, he's in the office, but not for any other reason other than he's got 4 kids at home and it's impossible to get anything done. So I do think that the world after this whole thing blows over, and this shall pass, we're going to have that's different is going to be choice, right? Before, like in my job, I could work anywhere. I'll tell you a story. Before it was Christmas 2019, I got on a flight on a Monday night, flew to Auckland, New Zealand, did a 2-hour presentation, got back on a plane and came back, never got a hotel room, was left on a Monday, got back on a Wednesday, because that's how business was done. You had to be there in person. Now they're like, why would you ever do that again? I'm glad to see you on Zoom. So I think there is more of an acceptance that certain things can be done remotely now that never were acceptable in the past. And so that shift gives us more choice. And with that, we need different controls, which I think, Ian, you talked about being monitor who's doing what and identifying, I'm actually John doing what I'm doing. Those are key enablers we're going to see, become more and more important, right?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. John, I also kind of like everyone don't really know. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to actually state in the beginning, my thoughts are my own, not my employer's. So I don't represent Federal Reserve Bank in anything that I say, but my experience, I represent my experience. But I don't know what the future of the new normal will be. I'm sure it'll be a combination of both, because there's individuals that prefer to be in the office and are more productive there. But yeah, there's for others, the convenience and the safety for pre-existing health conditions necessitates them to reduce the risk of their health risk. But I agree on the control front, on the cybersecurity control front, that there will be a need to have a better understanding of where your data resides. Even before the pandemic, we saw a lot of our data moving to the cloud, but perhaps the organizations weren't always aware of all the cloud accounts that were being utilized by all the different teams, whether it's like marketing or sales or whatnot. And so having those kind of that insight, that visibility, the understanding of key business processes that generate revenue and what that flow looks like so that your security teams can protect that is going to be even more important, I think, in the next month as this blend of working from home and working remote continues.
I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts around the theme of visibility, right? I think one of the things that we saw when the pandemic first hit was that from an IT and a cybersecurity perspective, you went from 90% of your workforce working in the office where most of the traffic was traversing a firewall, right? It was going inside, outside. And so that centralized logging actually provided great visibility. As an organization, you had a pretty good sense of what was happening because you just look at the firewall, and you can see, okay, well, this is happening and that's happening, et cetera. With the work from home, now you're actually losing a lot of that visibility. So the network monitoring solutions that had been in place historically to get a pretty good idea of, look, what's my organization doing? Are we logging in a lot, or is data going in and out? Like, what's actually happening? There was a gap now of visibility. And so there was a kind of an absence of being able to say with a high degree of certainty, okay, here's what's happening. And we know that because here's the logs, here's the dashboards, et cetera. With the migration to work from home, we kind of had that gap. Now with kind of looking at more of a hybridized, some work from home, some work remote. I've heard recently the term 3-2-2, right? So 3 days a week you're in the office, 2 days a week you're working remote, and then 2 days you're off. In comparison to the traditional 8-hour a day, 9 to 5 work week. Would love to understand, like, how much of an impact has that had on the technology roadmap, over the next 3 to 5 years? And I'm, not looking at any specific vendor or solution, but just, I guess, how much of an impact has that had overall on just thinking about those longer term roadmap items? I mean, have you had to just throw everything out and kind of start from scratch, or have you been able to be more nimble? Would love to kind of understand both from yourself, Carlos, and Michael, how you're thinking about those problems.
Carlos, did you want to go first?
Yeah, I can definitely touch upon that. So a lot of different organizations have obviously different threat models, and it really depends on what your risk is and your risk appetite. So a lot of organizations will architect appropriately to control those risks. For example, at some organizations that I've been at, they were completely open and nimble with having VDIs, virtual desktop infrastructures. And that really enabled them to be very nimble, to be able to kind of tightly control in a decentralized manner, if you will, how and where their data was being accessed and processed and used. And it provided a lot of visibility. There's other organizations that they say, okay, this kind of data is just, it's like we want this level of control over it, and therefore the only way we can accomplish that is with dedicated systems that are not virtualized, that are not ephemeral. So it really depends on the unique business challenges and the risk, the cybersecurity risk. I feel that's going to drive how that technology will be orchestrated going forward. So there's not, I hate to say, I don't know what the answer is going to be, but I know that there's not a one size fits all solution for every organization due to the unique risks that they all have.
I think
any insider thoughts?
I think from my perspective, the virtual desktop solution really solidified it for us, right? Working from the office or working from home, I'm still using that same virtual desktop, using the same defense in depth model that we use at Metro from a security perspective. Prior to that, with the traditional workstations, you're correct, Ian, it was very difficult, right? Because you didn't know, if users were logging in, what they were doing on the systems, all those kind of things. You kind of lost visibility to it. But today with virtual desktop technology, we really only allow individuals access to our corporate data using those virtual desktops and using the same security technologies that we put in place. So we have a better handle on it. I would like to ask the panel though, I was talking to another startup company a couple days ago about their solution at looking at data that is or has left the organization. When people are going, Carlos, you said the Federal Reserve Bank is starting to go into the cloud. I'm assuming Office 365, maybe the G Suite. Do you have visibility into that data today? And if so, what are you using in order to see that data? Or is it a blind spot to you?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. Great question. And I'll just take a moment to clarify. I didn't say that we're actually moving to the cloud, but I meant to say that, and I believe I did say that organizations are actually overall in general, as in all verticals, are moving more and more into the cloud. But with that said, there are a lot of solutions to your point, Michael, about maintaining that visibility. There's a lot of controls, such as the CASB controls that broker the access to the cloud services. And those are great to help organizations maintain that kind of visibility, that logging that's necessary for cybersecurity teams to do their job efficiently when and if there are any issues of either exfiltration or issues that may affect that may be of concern for the organization. So yeah, it is a challenge, but understanding the flow of your data is important so that you can decide what is the value of that data and what are the appropriate controls to implement around that.
can I throw something out there that might be contradictory what Michael and Carlos are saying? My position is, well, I think sometimes being in the cloud could actually be more secure. I'll tell you why, right? So think about Salesforce.com. The first conversation we had with the banks 8 years ago about putting customer information in the cloud, the answer is like, the lawyers are like, no way, you can't do that. Then you explain why. They're like, okay, that's interesting. And then they're like, well, if you make sure certain things are okay, then we'll be comfortable with that. So, but now imagine doing CRM without being in the cloud, right? Think about the amount of money and resources and talent that Salesforce's, AWS, Google spend on securing their networks. They just frankly have bigger teams focused on this, that because it is core to their business. As soon as that there's an issue with a security issue with their cloud, their business model is really troubled, right? So because it's so core to their business, I feel like they actually have more resources than most banks frankly do to invest in locking down their environment. Like Google has their own private optical network. I mean, that's something that's different. It's not even over a public network. So there are certain things that I find that there's advantages actually of being in the cloud. And your point around traceability, auditability. I mean, having put in some CRM system, you could have audit logs out the yin yang about what people are doing, who does what, and a lot of those things are frankly traceable, right? So, my point is not that it's necessarily 100% safer, but it's no less safe than it is on-prem, right? I love your thoughts on this, Michael and Carlos too.
Yeah, I guess I wasn't concerned as much about the security of the platforms, but knowing where your data is. And who has access to that data. One of the things that we're looking to do at Metro is roll out Office 365. We haven't gotten to that state yet, but we're going to start rolling out something like Teams. And I've heard Teams is a nightmare if you don't organize it properly and you don't have governance around it. So if you're starting to roll out things in these different collaboration tools, you got to make sure that you have the security or the foundation around how you're building those out and what data is living in those particular collaboration systems.
So we've had
I definitely agree with those statements there. I would just quickly add that understanding to Michael's point, where your data is and what the controls are around the value of that data. If that's to merit with if the controls are constant with the value of that data, then your organization is going to be in a good space because you're.
So we've had a question pop up. I'm actually surprised it took this long for the question to come up, but so for the group, can you all reflect on the recent SolarWinds events? And so the anonymous attendee asks, what does this vulnerability tell us about approaches to cybersecurity thus far? And what does it tell us, I guess, it needs to change going forward? Who wants to jump on that hand grenade?
Yeah, it's a loaded topic there. One of the perspectives that I love to add on this is that at different organizations, I've been blessed to work at a very well-matured security programs. One of the things that I really, really valued from one of them in particular was there was a very, very mature third-party risk, which enveloped the supply chain risk, cybersecurity risk, functionality of that. So understanding what your supply chain is and the cyber risk around that, around that supply chain, really, I'm not going to say what it prevented this, but it goes a long way to understanding what the differences are in these situations. Now, in this particular instance, the code was signed by the actual vendor, so there really is not much that could have been done there. But this, I think, highlights the importance of just understanding, being able to ensure that you have controls equivalent to that risk to mitigate any impact on the business as much as possible.
I think.
So that's blockchain.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, I think so. I do agree with you. I mean, it's challenging when you have a trusted supplier, right? Sign code that also has a backdoor injected. It's like, well, like what, it's hard to deal with that. But I think to Michael, to your earlier point, right, having a defense in depth strategy does mean that when you do have an adversary, and they pop a shell. And I actually haven't seen the details of SolarWinds. I don't know if there was hands-on keyboards anywhere, but you know, once they start pivoting internally and moving laterally and gaining creds elsewhere, you know, you would hope that there's either forensics data that you can then go back to, or even some of the other controls that would then be able to catch the downstream effects. And so, you know, it's kind of one of those things where in a perfect world, yeah, you would love to keep all the bad guys out all the time. I think though that what we're seeing, at least from my perspective, is that that's not possible, right? If you have a nation state threat actor with those amount of credentials, I think you just have to accept that, yeah, there are going to be some boxes that get popped. And so then the question is, well, how quickly can you identify that? And then boot them out of the network. And so having that defense in depth strategy is critical for exactly those reasons. Michael, any thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with Carlos. And going back to the defense in depth model, you have to also strategically pick the right partners, security partners, security vendors, because again, we have a small staff. We're a single shift staff. But we do have a couple key vendors of ours that are monitoring, managing, and alerting us of any security related issues 24/7 by 365. And so some of the technologies that we have in place, what would have actually told us if they were making those lateral movements. So just picking the right partners and understanding what those partners can do for you. And then making sure that you do have a very good defense in depth strategy. May it be software solutions, hardware solutions, a combination of those solutions, policies, procedures, incident response, security awareness training, the whole gamut of things that you need to put into your defense in depth model in order to protect your organization. Because at the end of the day, we all know that there's no holy grail. So you try to do your best to make the bad guys kind of go, too much work in trying to get into this organization. Let me go to the next one.
It's the old bear in the running shoes joke, right?
Yeah.
Guy sees a bear, says to his friend.
One of the things that I'd like to add.
Sorry, Carlos, I was just telling a joke. Go ahead.
No, it's good. It's a good joke. One of the things that I would just like to add, piggybacking off of Michael's last comment there, is sorry, this is a little bit of background noise. I'm gonna wait until that subsides. Okay, I think it's good now. So one of the things I'd like to piggyback off of Michael's comment is really, to your point, understanding your vendors, your partners very carefully. When one of the most effective strategies that I saw to help organizations evaluate and pick good vendors to complement their businesses, to enable their businesses more efficiently, was really just having, before the contracts are signed, it was just really asking them the questions around what are some of their security policies. Do they have do they have do they have policies? Do they have incident response programs? Do they have forensics and enabled in the organization? Because when you get that kind of understanding of their organization, you're gonna get a good picture of how well they take the security of their data and their processes to ensure that it's at least acceptable to your risk or to your organization's risk appetite. I don't see a lot of that going on in just my talks with a lot of other organizations, but I've seen it be an effective way to, when you got a handful of vendors that you're considering signing a contract with. I think it's a good tool that may help organizations make a really good choice for partners.
But I wonder, even for the SolarWinds example, I mean, my understanding, and again, we have not worked with them, we haven't partnered with them, so I'm taking like a true third party perspective. My assumption is that given the type of clients that they had, they probably had a fairly robust both internal security practice, but also an ability to certify to their fairly discerning clients, right? I mean, they're pretty well established in both Fortune 500 as well as FedGov. So I wonder even if the vendor risk management policy had been in place by the customers, and I'll assume just based on who the customers were that were publicly reported, they probably did. I just don't know that that would have caught. I don't know that would have turned up anything on the SolarWinds side of things, but actually I think what you're saying is really interesting, and so I wonder it might also even be too early, but I'd love to understand, are any of you seeing a shift from the best practice of doing vendor risk management, of vetting the partner, vetting the supplier, understanding their security controls, understanding, are they certified, are they insured, do they carry cyber insurance? Is that best practice moving more into a mandate? Are you seeing anything from the regulators, even from other cyber insurance providers, saying, look, if we're gonna carry you, the bank, you need to make sure that your upstream providers have, X, Y, and Z? Are you guys seeing any shift from a best practice to more of a mandate, given as a result of this breach?
I'm just going to say not yet. I think it's too early for that. I know, the Division of Banks, for example, is reaching out to the different banks in the area, asking them if they're a SolarWinds customer. I think the CISA just came out with a best practice of having every organization go in, do forensics within their environment, which is going to be somewhat costly to do that, but it's something that we probably will need to do. And then it'll be interesting moving forward how the auditors start auditing us on an annual basis and what they'll be looking for.
Carlos?
I haven't, I'll be honest, in the few cyber insurance policy contracts that I've reviewed, I haven't seen the actual requirements in there explicitly stated. There are guidelines that are kind of like it'd be great if, but not requirements. Yeah.
John, are you seeing any guidance from your perspective on any of these shifts?
So, I mean, I can't really comment on the technology because you guys are the experts in the room, but I do see there's a real trend here around, what our capabilities we as organizations need, where we depend on third parties. So contract management, vendor management, absolutely important. There's got to be a culture where we collectively try to, protect against these kind of threats. And there's also there needs to be a little bit of a realization around risk that, there are going to be certain risks that we just cannot manage. So how do we respond to it in the best way? So it's a little bit of a shift. I mean, I work exclusively in the banking space, and we always say the bank of the future is not going to be built yourself, but you're going to assemble it, right? When you're assembling it, you naturally are going to be dependent on third parties. So understanding what that means, having a culture of identifying risks early and often, right? And then again, it's not, I don't have a technology answer to give you. We actually have a whole team that does security operations control for other organizations. I could ask a friend, but personally in my space, what I see is a real leadership driven discussion around, hey, we're all in this together and we need to find ways to work this through. There's gonna be you can't predict where all the risks are gonna be. You just have to accept that there will be some. It's how you respond, how resilient you are when the risk gets identified, and how vigilant you are in terms of catching it early is the best muscle for us to develop, I think, in this world that we have, right?
I think you touched upon something interesting there. So you're referencing, an acceptance of some risk. I think certainly the security practitioners are cognizant of, a lot of times people are actually the biggest risk. I mean, forget about the technology itself, but when you consider phishing attempts or spear phishing attempts, they're trying to exploit the person at the end of the day. So we have a question here. So interested to hear about the human factors aspect of cybersecurity. Human vulnerabilities are cited as the weakest link in carrying out effective cyber attacks by experts. In the current situation of COVID, where aspects of distraction, human error may be less controlled than the office environment, what are some considerations that we should look at? And how can cyber infrastructure take this into consideration?
So I'm just going to put a thought out there. So there's some basic things: training, awareness, get it. So within the firm, I have to do mandatory training. Every client, I've got to do it again. The same things I learn again, but it gets reinforced in your mind about don't click on that email that you shouldn't. But I think there's an element, a body of knowledge that we maybe can apply here around behavioral economics and behavioral science. What makes someone curious enough to click on something that says, hey, you won $1 million, right? Like, you must know that that's not true. But why do people do it anyway? And, so I think there's the obvious things around training and policies and those good things. But I do think we can look at, what's been what has caused a human being to be so vulnerable in the past and why they're the weakest link? And is there certain behavioral elements we could actually nudge them to do something different? So they see an email they're not quite sure about. How do you make it easy for them to put it into a safe spot and not double click on it and open it? You know, like I think there are things that we haven't actually gotten into that we can, right? Identifying opportunities where we think there might be phishing, like just having it, like in my Outlook, there's an easy button. I literally push, I think, hey, I think this is a phishing issue. It goes directly to my IT group and they investigate, right? So sometimes just making it easy and making it obvious is a simple way to help that human being do what no one inherently wants to bring risk to their organization. People are trying to do the right thing, but sometimes we just don't know better, right? So making it easy for them to do the right thing may be a way of solving some of those issues.
Carlos?
I definitely agree with that. There, one of the things that I believe in is just security awareness. Security training is one of the best. Value of having a user be able to distinguish between a bad email and a good email, a safe email can be the difference between a successful cybersecurity attack or not. And it doesn't matter if you have the state of the art
I think we got a bit of lag there with you, Carlos.
Yeah, so once he comes back, again, a lot of security awareness training. We use a security awareness training tool. We send in phishing campaigns and then actually train end users if they decide to click on a link by providing them a video of why they shouldn't have clicked on that particular link to begin with. But we've also put in simple things like banners so that an individual knows that the email is coming from the outside world. You wouldn't get an email from an employee, for an example, from the outside world coming in, because that would be some type of impersonation attempt. And we use technologies to kind of block those impersonation attempts as well. So really, again, security awareness training, and over time, your users will get better. But as John stated, it's only going to take one click, one user clicking on something that actually can possibly damage your network or damage your environment. So again, we try to do our best with defense in depth technologies in order to even block those types of attempts by doing things like geo-blocking from different countries or blocking certain domains from coming into the organization. So again, it's the whole thing, right? There's no holy grail. You need to do things from a human perspective to train your employees to do a better job when emails are coming in, to take the time to look at the email as opposed to trying to multitask and going, oh, here's an email from Mike McGovern. I need to click on it because he's telling me something really important. And again, at the end of the day, you need to kind of step back and go, oh, there's an external banner there. That's coming from the outside world. Maybe it's a phishing attempt. Let me reach out to the information security department. Or let me click on that little button up on top of my Outlook that says potential phishing email and send it to your information security department or your third party for them to take a look at it and review it.
Yeah, speaking of, Mike, I want to talk to you about the 100,000 you want me to wire to your offshore account just once we're after this. I mean, it is interesting, right? I mean, one of the things that I noticed just personally, not even from a client perspective, was personally there seemed to be an uptick in phishing attempts during COVID, and I have to think that the threat actors are savvy enough to realize, like, hey, we're all exhausted. I mean, there's running the usual business and then the day-to-day, plus there's the massive uncertainty of the pandemic. Obviously, there's been some uncertainty with other parts of life, politics, etc. And I just wonder if the bad guys are sitting there thinking, I wonder if people are more tired now and more distracted now than they were previously. And should we double down on the phishing attempts? Because to your point, it only takes one click. And if you're already exhausted, if you're already frazzled, if you're already stressed out, you're in a different work environment, your routine is disrupted, the likelihood that you may actually click on it may actually go up. I think Carlos, I think we have you back now. Do you want to jump in on that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So we saw a exponential increase in phishing attacks during the pandemic, and it's really one of those kind of common themes that we see whenever there's a new crisis that arises. With it, there's always going to be individuals that want to exploit that as a means to financially exploit or technically exploit an organization to get to obtain their targets on objective, and we saw it increase tremendously. Luckily, the user education program, cybersecurity user education program we had was very mature. We had just a tremendous amount of discerning users, reliably, constantly reporting anything that they kind of saw suspicious, which is good. Sometimes it's kind of like, be careful what you wish for, because you can get a high number of reports that you kind of have to discern from, like, is this legitimate, is this not? But as much as possible, we always try to automate that kind of work, but then at the same point encourage that behavior. But totally agree, the numbers increase exponentially, and we've seen it go down now, plateau after about, I want to say maybe 4 months, started to plateau. But now that there's talk of the vaccines, we've seen a spike kind of go up again. And I'm sure that's very constant and similar to other organizations, what other organizations are seeing. But again, the human factor here has been one of the key differences to keeping our organization secure.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's Mark Goodman that had a book called Future Crimes. I don't remember the exact stat, but I remember saying one time, just on average, the bad guys, just assume the bad guys are already here. It takes like 260 days sometimes to even detect if they're in your network. So, get it that we get a lot more incident reports, but I think that's a good thing. You actually just need a way to manage that data and suss out the truth from what's not true, because being resilient to intrusion and attacks is probably the right line of defense in a lot of cases, because you just can't predict all these things, right? So I know that's comforting or not for most people, but I think it's a reality.
So we're coming close to the end of our time. So I think we'll wrap up with one final question, and I'm going to modify it for the three of you. So the final question, which actually comes to us from one of the viewers. So the question is, what is the biggest cybersecurity challenge or forgotten risk on the horizon for the near term? So in other words, 2021, what's the thing that keeps you up at night? And so it'd be interesting for the three of you to answer from three different perspectives. So Carlos, maybe from on the ground level, threats that you're facing on a day-to-day basis. Michael, it'd be really interesting to hear from your perspective of kind of the overall bank perspective. And then John, if you kind of go almost like from an industry perspective, or even forget about cybersecurity necessarily, but just what are the largest risks that you see on behalf of your clients? And we can kind of go around. So Carlos, do you want to kick it off?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So speaking, and again, not speaking in terms of my employer specifically, but just in general, being in incident response is a very specialized small field. So you tend to develop these tight trusted networks with other incident response individuals and specialists from other organizations. And the thing that we constantly talk about in the beginning of the COVID pandemic is that this really brought to focus the need to just keep the lights on and keep the business running, and during this crisis situation where we're not sure if our employees are going to show up to work the next day because their kids are sick, they're sick, their spouses are sick. So this really provided an excellent opportunity to focus in on the basics, such as like having a hardware inventory, having a software inventory, because we were just trying, our organization was just trying to keep the lights on. So it really highlights the need to have that really solidified, like the top CIS 20 controls, just having that well done. Because in talking to my cohorts across industries, there's a lot of organizations that don't actually have that. They may have like multi-million-dollar network visibility controls, but they don't necessarily have a very good asset management database or configuration database. And that becomes, I think, one of the key challenges is in trying to catch up with the latest technologies, but still ensuring that you have a mastery of the basics is a challenge, especially when leadership is really focused on pushing the roadmap forward of the organization. Sometimes we have to give that upward communication to say, I think that's a really great idea and I understand your perspective, but here's something that we may need to focus on as well so that we don't have a gap in our defenses. That's my perspective.
Michael?
Yeah, you asked the question, what keeps me up at night, right? So it really is, what's the next attack vector? And am I protected against it? Really, you can spend hundreds of millions of dollars trying to protect yourself, but if you have a gap in your environment, it's not going to protect you from that, right? So I'll give you a story. We have a third party that actually comes in, not only to Cambridge Trust. I brought them over as part of my defense in depth model. They're a third party security vendor. They told me a story one time where they were asked to try to get into a building. This company had put in a multi-million-dollar system, security system, along with security guards, et cetera, and they were just sitting there going, geez, we're not going to be able to penetrate this building. And at noontime, the side doors of the building opened up because people were walking out for lunch. And guess how they got into the building? Through those side doors, up into where the senior management team were, and they actually sat there and plugged into the network in the conference room. So those are the kind of things that keep me up, right? Because no matter how much you invest and how much you've put in from a defense in depth model perspective, there's always going to be that one area that's open, wide open. And those are the things that kind of keep me up at night.
So if I want to round out and talk about the impact of cybersecurity on the industry and financial services, but also the government space you talk about, it's the breach of trust, right? Banks trade on trust. It's important that consumers trust that their money is safe. The businesses who put their money into these banks need to trust that their payments are going to happen. When breaches happen and that trust gets eroded, it's really hard to gain that back, and that could have a real detrimental effect into the efficiency of our system. So anytime there is a breach, because there will be more, understanding what the root cause was and what we're doing to prevent the next one is going to be important. And it has to be written in a way, not for all you smart people on this call to understand, but the layperson like myself, right? Who says, oh, that's what that means. And okay, I know that means my money's still safe. And I think that's the trust equation is something that we have to think a little bit about around, the implications of any of these kind of breaches. So we're all in the business here. You're on the business of keeping us safe. And I think that is critical to the whole system.
So we've had a few questions coming in. So we can kind of do a little lightning round. We've still got a few minutes here before the top of the hour. So there's been a few questions around kind of siloed systems. So maybe just very briefly, can you comment on siloed system problems related to address risk and compliance over enterprise domains and DNS change management, visibility, and automation? So I think the question really is, you have all these different cybersecurity systems or software that are siloed from one another, and then how can you actually converge them together to address risk and compliance? Carlos and Michael, do you have comments on that?
I'm trying to understand the question. That's so are we saying when you say siloed, are you talking about security technologies and how you take those technologies and bring them together so you have a correlation of data? Is that what we're talking about?
I think so. I interpret the question as you have multiple cybersecurity systems, particularly around domains, DNS management, but the fact that they are siloed, you may have gaps. And so how does that roll up to a larger compliance framework where you have more of a holistic view on the network?
Well, again, you might want to bring in a technology, for example, like Splunk, that can actually take all your silos and actually you can take that data and funnel it into a Splunk portal where you can actually do all that data correlation. You're not going to be able to get 100% of your particular siloed security technologies into Splunk. So what you'll need to do is actually, unfortunately, look at multiple ones. Hopefully it's less than one or two that you need to look at, but that's how I would do it at the end of the day.
Yeah, this is Carlos. I think I just saw some additional kind of comments come in from Peter there, trying to add some more context to the question. So in light of that additional context, Peter, I can just kind of comment based on some strategies that I've seen for, to your point, siloed systems, sometimes implemented by siloed even teams, working in that same organization. One of the things that I've really appreciated and had the benefit of working with, which I know is not unique and uniform across all verticals and organizations, we're all unique, is having the ability to, despite having different registrars and accounts and services, being able to feed it into a single SIM so that we can correlate for the rules and logic around any potential threats in that SIM based on the disparate log feeds that we're getting is really valuable. So that's one area that I would recommend exploring. And I know it's hard because it's like it's a human thing, so you got to convince people to just open up and share their data, and then it's executing on that organizational change as well. But I know that this is a lightning round, so I'll leave it at that.
That's excellent. Well, I think we're just about at the top of the hour, so I'd just like to extend a very warm thank you to Michael, to Carlos, to John. I think this has been a really interesting collection of perspectives. And so for those who are on the call, we will be doing a follow-up email where the recording will be available. And I just want to say thank you very much, and hope everybody stays safe for 2021.
Thanks. And if anybody needs to get a hold of me, if you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Yeah, same goes. Happy to help. Interesting discussion, guys. Thank you.
Same, I'm on LinkedIn. Thanks, everyone.
I think Ian wanted us to be a little bit more confrontational, though, but it didn't seem so.
Excellent. All right. Thanks, everybody.